They say the dead don't speak, that once the breath leaves the body, all that's left is silence. They're wrong. My name is Davis Mercer, and I keep watch over the dead. Ashridge Hollow Cemetery is my home, my work, and most nights, my only company. I rake the leaves, reset the headstones when the frost shifts them, and make sure the gates are locked after dark. It's the kind of place people drive past without really seeing. Overgrown trees lean too far in. The iron fence is rusted to red, and the gravel paths vanish under moss. If you ever came looking for it, you'd think the place was long abandoned. But I'm here, and so are they. I've been the caretaker of Ashridge Hollow for going on 7 years now. Took the job after my wife passed. People pitied me back then, said I needed something to keep me grounded. They didn't realize how literal that would become. 6 feet of earth can hold a lot more than bodies. It holds secrets. It holds memories. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, it holds voices. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That particular morning, the fog hung low over the headstones, thick as soup and just as tasteless. The air was sharp enough to bite, and the dampness clung to my clothes like something that didn't want to let go. I carried my shovel across the gravel path, boots crunching softly as I walked toward the eastern section of the graveyard, the old part, where the stones were so worn, most names had been scrubbed away by time. We had a burial scheduled later that afternoon. Small turnout, no family. Just a man who died alone in a trailer on the edge of Windmere. No one claimed the body. The county handled the arrangements. Happens more often than you'd think. The forgotten bury the forgotten. My job was to dig the hole, lower the box, and cover it all up like it never mattered. As I drove the shovel into the ground, the soil came up damp and black. Good digging earth. I worked in silence, save for the soft sound of metal cutting through dirt. It's strange how quiet a graveyard really is when you're the only one alive in it. No birds. No wind. Just you, and the weight of the world underneath your feet. I paused to wipe the sweat from my brow when I noticed it. A sound. Not loud, not sudden. Just faint, like a whisper far off in the trees. I stood still, shovel in hand, listening. Nothing. Then it came again. A little closer this time. Soft. Murmuring. Like someone speaking from behind a wall of dirt. I looked around. No one. Just rows of stones peeking from the mist like teeth. I held my breath, trying to listen harder. The whisper came again, closer now and clearer. I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm of speech. Like someone telling a story I wasn't meant to hear. A sudden shiver ran down my spine. Wind in the trees, I muttered to myself. But the trees weren't moving. I leaned down and touched the edge of the grave I'd started. The soil was warm. I straightened up quick, heart ticking faster in my chest. That wasn't right. This was early spring. The nights were still cold enough to frost the windows of my truck. The ground should have been cold, too. I glanced down into the shallow hole. Black dirt stared back at me. I told myself I was just tired. Too many late nights, too much coffee, not enough sleep. I was a man of habit, of routine. I didn't scare easy. I'd worked through storms, buried murderers, and even chased off a drunk or two who thought a graveyard made for a fine camping spot. But that whisper, it wasn't like anything I'd heard before. I filled the wheelbarrow with the first load of dirt and pushed it toward the edge of the lot, where the earth always gave a little under your step. That part of the cemetery had never sat quite right. Even the graves leaned a bit. I always figured the ground was soft from years of erosion. Now I wasn't so sure. By the time the sun crept through the fog, the whispers were gone. The soil was quiet again, and the air felt normal, like the morning had never been strange at all. But as I locked the cemetery gate behind me that evening, I paused. Because somewhere in the distance, just beyond the oldest headstones, I heard it one more time. A whisper. My name. Clear as breath. Davis. And then the earth went still. The night it started, the sky hung low with heavy clouds, thick like wool soaked in rainwater. I'd just finished sealing old Mrs. Henley's grave, fresh dirt packed tight, headstone pressed level into the soil. The cold had crept into my bones, and the shovel felt heavier than usual, like the earth itself didn't want to let go of her. Ashridge Hollow always got quiet after sunset. Not just quiet, still. The kind of still that makes your ears ring with the absence of noise. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place at night, like it knew something I didn't. But that evening, just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A whisper. It was faint at first. I stopped mid-step, holding my breath. It had come from behind me, near the fresh grave. I turned slowly, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just the mounded dirt, the crooked row of headstones behind it, and the thick mist rising off the ground. I waited. Nothing again. I let out a breath and gave a short laugh, though it sounded hollow. Need to lay off the coffee, I muttered. Maybe I was just tired. Happens when you work with the dead too long, you start hearing things. Seeing things. I slung the shovel over my shoulder and headed toward the chapel. That's when I heard it again. Davies! This time it was clearer. It didn't come from the wind. It came from the ground. I froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned back toward the grave, heart thumping a little faster now. Hello! I called, my voice louder than I intended. It echoed through the trees. No answer. Just the creak of a branch overhead and the soft rustle of leaves. I walked back to the grave. The soil looked undisturbed. No prints, no holes, nothing out of place. I crouched down and placed my hand on the mound. Cold, firm, silent. Probably just settling, I told myself, but the words felt weak. I'd buried hundreds, hell, maybe thousands, of people over the years. I knew the sounds the ground made. This wasn't one of them. The whisper had said my name. I stood and looked around again. The mist had thickened, curling low around the tombstones like fingers clawing across the grass. I could barely make out the tree line. Everything beyond looked like smoke. That's when I noticed something else. The cemetery was too quiet. No crickets. No night birds. Not even the soft hum of the town's power lines that usually buzzed faintly through the trees. Just silence, and the feeling that something was watching me. I backed away from the grave, slow and steady. I didn't run. You don't run in a place like Ashridge Hollow. The dead deserve better than panic. When I reached the chapel, I shut the door hard and leaned against it, heart thudding in my chest. I stayed there for a minute, eyes on the stained glass window, my breath fogging in the cold. Maybe it was stress, lack of sleep, the weight of being alone with the dead too long. But deep down I knew better. That whisper had known my name. And graves don't usually talk back. I was never one for ghost stories. Folks in Windmere loved them, though. Old coal miners and barmaids with crooked teeth, all whispering about shadows that moved on their own, lights flickering in the woods, and the hollow ground, at the edge of the cemetery where even the crows wouldn't perch. I'd heard them all before. Every time I walked into town for groceries or parts for the mower, someone would try to tell me something strange about Ashridge Hollow. I'd smile, nod, and go on about my day. After all, I was the one who slept no more than 100 feet from those graves, and nothing had ever touched me. Until the whispers started. That morning, I headed into town. Windmere was a place that felt like it had been left behind by time. The streets were quiet, stores barely clinging to life. The local hardware shop, Dale's Supply and Feed, still used a hand crank register and smelled like oil and dust. I needed nails and a fresh lantern battery. The sun had been setting earlier, and I wasn't about to stumble around a graveyard blind. Inside the store, Dale looked up from his paper and gave me a small nod. He was an old man with a face like dried leather and eyes that didn't blink much. "You're still working that hollow?" he asked as I grabbed what I needed. "Somebody's got to," I said. Dale watched me for a moment, chewing his tongue like he was debating something. "You hear it yet?" he asked finally. "Hear what?" "The earth. They say it talks this time of year. Right round the blood moon." I gave a dry chuckle. "You been drinking with Lyle again?" His eyes didn't flinch. "I'm serious, Davis. There's something buried deep in that place. It ain't right. My daddy used to say the ground back there was cursed. No flowers ever took root. Even the weeds curl up and die. That's not just bad soil, that's something else." I didn't answer right away. The image of that moving gravestone from 2 nights ago flashed in my mind. And the whisper that said my name. "You ever meet Carl Lott?" I asked, changing the subject. Dale grunted. "That lunatic? Used to be a professor or something. Then he got real strange. Moved out into the woods, started talking about rituals and old gods. He's the kind of man you stop listening to if you want to sleep at night." I paid for my supplies, thanked Dale, and walked out into the chilled morning air. The sun was high, but the wind bit deep. As I made my way back up the road to Ashridge Hollow, I passed the forest edge. That's when I saw him. Carl Lott stood just off the road in the trees, watching me. He was tall but hunched, with wiry gray hair that hung in clumps over his ears. His coat was threadbare, and he clutched a small leather book against his chest like it was something alive. "You've heard them, haven't you?" he asked without moving closer. I stopped. "Excuse me?" "The voices," he said. "They're waking. The bindings are loosening." I squinted at him, unsure if he was drunk, mad, or both. What is it you think is under that cemetery, Mr. Lot? He stepped forward just enough that I could see his face clearly. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, but alert, too alert. Not ghosts, he said softly. Something older. They came before the settlers. Before names. The first ones who walked this land tried to bury it. Tried to forget it. But the hollow remembers. I took a step back, unsure if he meant to follow me. He didn't. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, though I was lying to both of us. And I don't much care. Carl's mouth twisted into a crooked smile. You will. I turned and walked quickly up the path toward the cemetery, the heavy silence of the woods pressing in behind me. I didn't look back, but I heard him say one last thing, quiet, almost tender. They always whisper first. I kept walking. I didn't sleep that night. The wind howled, but it was the silence underneath it that kept me awake. Like the land was holding its breath, waiting for something to rise. And deep beneath the soil, I swear, I heard the softest sound. Like fingers brushing against a coffin lid. From the inside. I keep a notebook by the door to my tool shed. Every evening before I start my rounds, I jot down a list of the graves I'm supposed to check. Fresh ones, older ones with crumbling edges, anything the rain might have gotten to. Routine. Steady. Predictable. But that morning, when I flipped through my old entries, one thing stood out. Grave 141. Samuel Wren. Born 1721, died 1792. I'd logged it 2 weeks ago as stable, stone intact, soil firm. Yet when I passed by it the night before, I could have sworn the headstone looked different. Tilted a few inches left. I figured it was my mind playing tricks. The fog had rolled in thick, and the moonlight doesn't always show you what's real. Still, something nagged at me. After my morning coffee, I walked out with my spade and kneeling mat, ready to check it out. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the rows of stones. The air smelled of wet grass and old earth. Samuel Wren's headstone stood near the oldest part of Ashridge Hollow. There's a crooked birch tree that leans like it's whispering secrets to the graves. His marker was carved in worn slate, the letters faded with time. Here rests Samuel Wren. Let the earth keep his bones. I stared at the stone for a while. It was definitely off-center, leaning forward like it wanted to fall face first into the dirt. I pressed my boot into the soil near the base. It gave too easily. I frowned, dropped to my knees, and started to dig around the edge of the headstone. The ground here should have been firm. Packed. Nobody had touched this grave in decades. Maybe longer. But the dirt came up soft. Loose. Like it had been turned recently. I set the spade aside and ran my fingers through the soil, feeling for root or rock. My hand brushed something cold. Not stone. Not bone either. I cleared more dirt, brushing the earth away bit by bit, until I saw it. A carving. Beneath the headstone, carved into the foundation stone hidden underground, was a symbol. A circle with 3 curved lines through it, almost like claws. The lines didn't look worn down by time. They looked fresh. New. My heart started to beat harder. I looked around the cemetery. Quiet. Still. But I felt watched. I pressed my palm flat against the marking. It was warm. Not from the sun. It hadn't touched this side of the stone yet. No, this warmth came from inside the earth. Something moved beneath my hand. I yanked it back like I'd touched a snake. The ground shifted, not much, just a ripple under the surface, like breath through a throat. I stumbled to my feet and stepped back, staring at the grave. Wind, I said aloud, though there wasn't a breeze in the air. The birds weren't singing. I looked at the headstone again. Now it seemed to be leaning even more. Not forward down, like it was being pulled. I gathered my tools with shaking hands and backed away, eyes fixed on the dirt. I didn't take my eyes off it until I was back on the gravel path. That night, I didn't make my rounds. I stayed inside the shed with the lights on and the radio playing softly. And around midnight, just as I was drifting off in my chair, the radio cut to static. Only for a second. And in the silence between the hissing, I thought I heard a voice say, "Closer." It didn't come from the radio. It came from beneath my feet. The fog rolled in thick that night. Not like the soft, ghostly kind you see in movies. This was heavy, wet and clinging, the kind that made it feel like the air itself was pressing against your skin. It came without warning, too. 1 minute the moon was out, pale and sharp in the sky, and the next it vanished behind a wall of gray. I'd just finished trimming the overgrowth along the eastern wall when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not peaceful quiet, unnatural. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. I clicked off my shears and stood still, trying to hear anything. The crickets had stopped. No wind. No owls. Even the frogs near the creek weren't croaking. Just the soft sound of mist dripping from branches and stone. Then I heard it again. The whisper. It didn't come from above or around me. It came from below. Soft at first, like someone humming into the dirt. A long, low murmur, no real words, not at first. Just a rhythm, like a lullaby sung through wet soil. I knelt down beside the nearest grave, my hand brushing over the nameplate. The stone belonged to a woman named Miriam Lowell, buried in 1894. A harmless name. Nothing strange about her, far as I knew. But the sound was coming from her grave. I leaned in closer, my ear inches from the cold earth. That's when it changed. The whispering turned into a pattern, voices, not just one. Male and female, layered and breathless. They spoke in something like a language I didn't know, but it still made the hairs rise on my neck. Whatever they were saying, it wasn't meant for human ears. And yet, I felt like they were talking directly to me. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and stood up too fast. The fog had gotten thicker in the short time I was kneeling. The cemetery path was gone, swallowed by gray. Even the chapel, which had stood a short walk away, was nothing but a shadow now. And then I saw it. A trail in the fog. Not on the ground, but in it. The mist was parting just slightly, like something was walking through it, brushing it aside. But there were no footsteps. No figure. Just a slow, gliding path that led toward the far edge of the cemetery, near the stump of that dead oak tree I always avoided. I don't know what made me follow it. Maybe I was too curious for my own good. Maybe the voices had gotten in my head more than I realized. Either way, my boots started moving on their own, crunching soft against the gravel as I followed the invisible trail through the fog. The deeper I walked, the colder it got. Not the kind of cold that comes with night. This felt ancient, like something that hadn't been warm in centuries was nearby. When I reached the old oak stump, I noticed the ground was different. Softer. The dirt looked freshly turned, but I hadn't dug here in years. I knelt down again, brushing away loose soil, and there it was. A rusted ring of iron, set into a thick, square slab of stone. Almost like the lid of a well. It was half buried, covered in moss and thick vines. I could have walked past it 100 times and never noticed. As I cleared more of the dirt, symbols began to appear around the edge of the stone. Carvings, not in English, not even in Latin. But I recognized one of them from the book Carl had shown me. The one about binding marks. This was a seal. I didn't open it. I'm not that stupid. But I touched the ring. Just to see. And in that moment, the whispering voices stopped all at once. For a few seconds, the silence returned. But it wasn't empty this time. It was loaded. Heavy with something waiting. Then, I heard it, clear and sharp. A voice, just one this time, deep and smooth. And it spoke in English. Hello, Davis. My blood ran cold. I backed away, nearly slipping in the dirt. I didn't look back. I just ran through the fog until I reached my shed, slamming the door and locking it behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner, shotgun across my lap, eyes on the window, listening to the fog press against the glass. But no voice came again. Not that night. Still, I knew something had changed. The cemetery wasn't just haunted. It was waking up. I didn't plan on going into the old part of the cemetery that night. It was one of those damp evenings where the fog rolls in early, hugging the ground like a second skin. I was walking my usual path with my lantern in hand, checking for broken headstones, toppled flowers, or signs of animals digging where they shouldn't. But something felt off. The air was heavy. Still. Even the birds were quiet. I passed the row of colonial graves, the oldest in Ashridge Hollow. The stones there were hunched and crooked like old men with secrets. That's when I saw it again, that faint symbol on a tree trunk near the back fence. I'd scrubbed it clean just a few days ago. Now it was back, carved deeper. 3 lines in a spiral. Not natural. Not some kid messing around. It looked like it had always been there. I don't know why, but I followed it. Through the trees. Past the rusted fence post that marks where the cemetery ends and the woods begin. That's where I found the old stump again. Only this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. A thin line of stone just beneath the moss at its base. I dropped to my knees, scraping the moss away with my hands. Cold, wet dirt clung to my fingers as I uncovered what looked like a metal ring. I pulled. It groaned but gave way. A square door of old stone and rotted wood heaved open like a coffin lid. A staircase led downward. The smell hit me first, earth, mold, and something else. something like rusted metal soaked in rainwater for years. I should have closed the door and walked away. But I didn't. Lantern in one hand, I started down the steps. They were narrow and slick, carved into the stone itself. Roots had broken through in places, writhing through the cracks like veins. My breath echoed ahead of me, and the deeper I went, the colder it got. Each step felt like a descent into someplace not meant for the living. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a low, arched chamber. It was quiet, too quiet. The walls were lined with old brick, black with age, and the floor was packed earth. In the center stood a stone door, taller than me, sealed shut with thick iron bands. Symbols covered the face of it. Not words. Not anything I recognized. Just shapes. Spirals, circles, jagged lines. I stepped closer. A voice rose in my head. Not loud. Not angry. Just a whisper, faint and cold. Davis. I froze. My name. No one else knew I was down there. No one else could have said it. I turned, but the tunnel behind me was empty. I swallowed hard and raised the lantern to the symbols. My breath fogged the air. The closer I got to the door, the louder the whispers became. Not from behind me, not from around me. From beneath. From beyond the stone. They weren't speaking English. Not anything human. But I understood them in a way I couldn't explain. They were asking me something. Pleading. Promising. Let us out. Something shifted behind the door. A scraping sound. Like claws on stone. I stumbled backward and nearly dropped the lantern. Its light flickered. For a moment, I swear I saw something press against the inside of the door. A shape that shouldn't be able to move. A smear of darkness with too many limbs. I ran. Back up the stairs. Into the fog. Through the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the caretaker's shed, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, and for the first time in years, I slept with the lights on. I told myself it was just an old tomb. Maybe a hallucination. Maybe the air down there was too thin. But the next morning, when I went to check if it was all a dream, the entrance was gone. Buried. As if it had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. And I know what I heard. The dead don't whisper like that. Only something still alive, trapped, would. And it knew my name. It still knows my name. I found Carl at the edge of the woods, just outside the cemetery gates. He was crouched over something, his hands moving like he was tracing patterns in the dirt. He didn't hear me approach until I stepped on a twig. He jerked up, eyes wide, but then relaxed, like he was expecting me. His smile, crooked and thin, was both knowing and unsettling. I should have turned around, walked back to my shack, and locked the door. But something in me, some stupid curiosity, or maybe just a need to understand, kept me standing there, feet rooted to the ground. You came to listen, Carl said, wiping his hands on his old coat. His voice had a strange weight to it, like the earth itself was whispering through his words. He didn't sound surprised or even interested in my thoughts, just patient. Like he'd been waiting for me all this time. I didn't know what to say. You've been messing around with the cemetery, haven't you? I finally muttered. You've been digging into things you shouldn't. Carl chuckled, low and rough. Digging? You think that's what I've been doing? The truth is, boy, the earth has already dug itself up. All I'm doing is listening. I narrowed my eyes. I didn't like the way he said that, like the soil itself had secrets it was just waiting to share. I'd heard enough local gossip about Carl to know he wasn't just some eccentric. He was a man obsessed, chasing something, or maybe running from it. The way he looked at the cemetery, it was different from the way the rest of us looked. He didn't see a place of rest. He saw a place of waiting. You're not making any sense, I said, taking a step closer. What are you really after? What are you trying to dig up? Carl's eyes softened, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for him. But then his gaze hardened again, like he was remembering something sharp. Not digging, he said again, more slowly, like the words were tasting something old. I'm trying to wake them. It's all in the bones, boy. All in the bones. His hands, gnarled and pale, reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was yellowed, ancient-looking. He handed it to me, and when my fingers brushed against it, I felt a chill that wasn't from the air. I opened it carefully, reading the strange symbols that covered the page. The handwriting was tight, cramped, like it had been written in a rush. I couldn't make sense of most of it. Carl leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. You see those markings? That's the language of the land, the old words. The ones that are buried here. He motioned to the cemetery behind him. The land remembers. It always remembers. I looked up at him, confused. What are you talking about? Carl's expression darkened, his eyes flicking to the cemetery, then back to me. There's a reason those graves don't settle right, you know. They were built on top of something that wasn't meant to be buried. Something that's been calling to me for years. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Do you feel it? The ground? It's awake. My heart thudded, but I didn't show it. You're crazy. Nothing's awake down there. Just the dead, just bones and dust. Carl shook his head, slowly, as if I were a child and he was trying to teach me something I should already know. Not dead, Davis. Not dead. Not like you think. It's something far older, something older than the bones. Something living. Waiting. I shook my head, taking a step back, but Carl's words seemed to pull me in, like the soil itself was tugging at my boots. Stop it. You need to leave. The things you're messing with, they're not something you can just wake up. Carl's eyes glinted. There was something unsettling in them. You don't understand, do you? It's not about waking it up. It's about listening. The ground is speaking to me, boy. And it's calling to you too. I laughed, though it didn't feel like laughter. That's insane. It's just the wind. It's just. Carl grabbed my wrist so fast, I didn't even see him move. His fingers were cold like death itself, and for a moment, I thought he was going to snap my arm. His grip tightened, and his voice was almost pleading. The wind doesn't talk, Davis. Not like this. I'm not crazy. I'm hearing them. We're hearing them. He released me abruptly, and I staggered back, my heart racing. I wanted to shout at him, call him a fool, tell him to leave, but I couldn't. His words echoed in my head. They weren't just empty nonsense. I knew that. I'd felt something. Something deep in the cemetery, something waiting beneath the surface, something old and heavy, pushing against the dirt. I'm not crazy, Carl repeated, his voice softer now, almost mournful. And neither are you. You're hearing them too, aren't you? I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words got caught in my throat. What if I was? What if the whispers weren't just my mind playing tricks? What if Carl was right? I turned and started walking away, not looking back, but his voice followed me. They're coming, Davis. The earth remembers. By the time I reached the cemetery gates, I felt colder than I ever had before. And the whispers? They were louder, clearer, as though they were right behind me, just beneath the earth. Watching. Waiting. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Carl was right. The ground was awake. There are things that shouldn't be buried. There are things that should never be touched again. I should have known that when I heard her voice, soft, like a whisper through the cracks in the floorboards, that something was wrong. It wasn't the first time I heard it. I had chalked up the whispers to the wind, to the long hours spent in the damp cemetery, to the loneliness pressing in like a vice. But this time, there was no mistaking it. I was out by the old well, near the southern corner of Ashridge Hollow. The fog was thick, hanging low in the air, a silent witness to whatever secrets the earth was keeping. I had finished up the last of my duties for the day, checked the gates, wiped down the stone markers that were more moss than marble, and I was heading back to my little shack when I heard it again. The voice, soft at first, calling my name. Davis. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I wondered if I had imagined it. The fog curled around my feet, thick enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of me. I looked around, expecting to find someone standing there, but the cemetery was empty, as it always was. I called out, but my voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. The air felt heavier. The ground beneath my boots seemed different. Alive. The silence returned, but something in it felt wrong. I shook my head and tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. But then it happened again. Louder, clearer this time. Davis. I glanced down at the well. The stone lid was cracked, something I hadn't noticed before. The whispers weren't coming from the wind anymore. They were coming from the depths. I stepped closer, my boots scraping against the worn cobblestone. The fog clung to me, cold against my skin. I knelt beside the well, peering into the blackness below. And that's when I saw it, a faint flicker of movement in the shadows. I leaned closer, drawn in by the pull of something I couldn't explain, something that felt like it had been waiting for me all along. And then, just for a moment, the whisper changed. She's here, Davis. My heart stopped. It was her. My wife. I'd buried her 3 years ago, under the willow tree at the far end of the cemetery, where the earth was soft and the roots ran deep. But I hadn't forgotten her. I couldn't. The grief still weighed on me, like a stone lodged in my chest. Every night since her death, I had tried to forget the way she died, the way her body had gone cold in my arms, the way I hadn't been able to save her. but there was no forgetting her. Not ever. Rachel, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Is that really you? The air grew colder. The ground trembled just beneath me, sending a shiver through my bones. I stood up quickly, my breath catching in my throat. No, this couldn't be happening. The fog around me thickened, and I heard her name again. A soft, insistent voice calling from below, pulling me down, deeper into the darkness of the well. Rachel, I said again, louder this time. Where are you? There was no answer at first. Just the rustling of the trees, the groaning of the old stones around me. And then I heard it. Not from above, but from beneath. The unmistakable sound of something moving, shifting, under the earth. The ground seemed to throb with it. I knelt beside the well again, my hand shaking as I reached toward the cracked lid. But before I could lift it, I heard something else. Something closer. A voice, faint but clear, coming from the earth below me. She's not where you left her, Davis. The words sent a chill down my spine, freezing me in place. I didn't know who was speaking, but I knew it wasn't Rachel. It wasn't anyone I knew. The voice was old, ancient, like the earth itself was speaking through someone else's mouth. I staggered back, my heart racing. My hands were trembling so badly that I had to hold onto the well's stone edge to keep from falling. What was happening? Why was I hearing these things? I turned to leave, my mind spinning, but then something stopped me. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, dragging, as if something was coming toward me. The footsteps didn't sound like anything human. No, these were something else, something heavier, with purpose behind them. My blood ran cold. My legs felt like stone, rooted to the ground as I turned around. There, standing at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden by the fog, was Carl. I hadn't seen him in days, but there he was, watching me. She's not here, Davis, Carl said, his voice low and raspy. And neither is the peace you think you have. He stepped forward, his eyes wild, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for me to finally hear what I wasn't supposed to. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't. The air had thickened, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Stop this, Carl, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Stop what you're doing. You don't know what's down there. What's beneath us? But Carl just smiled, a cold, distant smile. It's already too late for that, he said, his voice almost a growl. It's awake now, and it knows you. And then for the first time, I truly understood the weight of what I had done, what I had unleashed by ignoring the warnings. I wasn't just hearing the whispers anymore. I was part of them, and the earth was calling. It wanted something old, something that had been waiting beneath the ground for far too long. And now it was coming for me. The air smelled different that night, too thick, as if it were made of something else, something ancient. The fog had settled over the cemetery again, clinging to the ground like a damp, reluctant visitor. I walked through it, my boots sinking a little with every step as though the earth itself was trying to hold me back. The whispers hadn't stopped for days, but tonight they were louder. No longer faint voices or fleeting murmurs, but words that reached out to me, threading through my thoughts like old, tangled roots. I had been putting it off, pretending I was hearing things. The local townsfolk had made it easy to dismiss, with their warnings about curses and restless spirits. But I was the gravekeeper, wasn't I? The land wasn't supposed to be alive like that. Graves don't speak. They shouldn't. And yet, the ground had been stirring beneath my feet for days now. Every time I stood over a fresh grave, I felt it. This subtle shift, like the earth wanted to give up its secrets, like it was pushing something back into the world. Something hungry. That night, I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to know what it was. The crypt. I had to go back to it. The moon was hidden behind the fog, and the shadows in the cemetery were heavy, stretched long like fingers. I didn't take the lantern this time. There was no need. The path seemed to glow with an unnatural light, as if the cemetery was guiding me to the spot. Every step felt like it was meant to lead me somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. By the time I reached the crypt, I was already sweating, though the night was cool. The stones under my fingers felt warm, pulsing, almost alive. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. There was a hum in the air, a vibration that made my teeth ache. The door, the iron seal that had once been rusted tight, was different now. It was cracked. Barely, but enough to let something seep through. I had thought about this moment over and over, imagined it in flashes when I wasn't paying attention. I thought I would be prepared. But now that I was here, standing on the threshold of something that felt so much bigger than me, I wasn't sure if I could go through with it. The whispers were louder now, circling me like flies, buzzing in my ears. Davis, they said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. I had to push the door. It groaned in protest, the iron scraping against itself like the scream of a tortured animal. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the air cooler than outside, a sharp contrast to the warmth that had clung to me just moments before. The crypt was small, darker than I remembered. The walls were covered in centuries-old carvings, most of them indecipherable. But one thing stood out: the markings around the altar in the center, a wide stone table where bones had once been laid to rest. They were different, more deliberate. It wasn't just a grave anymore. It was a warning. I felt it then. Something was watching me. Not just the usual chill that comes with being in a graveyard. No, this was different. It was like something was waiting, just behind the veil, waiting for me to take that last step. The one that would open the door. The one that would finish what had been started all those years ago. I couldn't help myself. I stepped closer. The floor beneath me trembled, just a little. Enough to make my legs shake. And there it was, a soft, wet sound, like something squirming beneath the stone. The altar was moving, shifting, as if it, too, had been waiting. There were names carved into the stone, names I didn't recognize, but one stood out: Harrow. I don't know why that name hit me so hard. I couldn't place it, but it felt wrong. Like it had been etched into my brain before I'd even seen it. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise, and for the first time in days, the whispers stopped. Silence. Total, suffocating silence. Then, from the deepest part of the crypt, something moved. Slowly at first, like it was testing the air. It wasn't a shadow, not a creature. It was a presence. A weight. And it was pushing outward, stretching, looking for a way out. The stone altar cracked again, the creak of old rock filling the space. And as if to answer me, the ground itself seemed to growl, a deep, vibrating sound, like the earth was straining to let something loose. I stepped back, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my throat. But my feet refused to move. I was rooted to the spot. The whispers returned, louder now, twisting around me in a chorus. And then I understood. The entity wasn't just waiting, it was feeding. Feeding off the ground, off the earth, off the dead. It had always been there, beneath the cemetery, beneath the town. It had been waiting for someone to come along, someone curious enough to uncover it, to break the seal. I knew what I had to do. But as I turned, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, carved into the stone wall near the altar, barely visible beneath the layers of moss and time. To awaken the hollow is to become the hollow. My stomach lurched. This wasn't about knowledge. This wasn't about solving some ancient mystery. The ground wasn't just stirring to be uncovered. It was calling for something far worse. The hollow wasn't something buried. It was something alive. And it had been waiting for me. I had never liked the look of the toolkit. It had sat under a dusty cloth in the back of the keeper's shed for years, a forgotten relic I'd never thought to touch. That was, until the whispers grew louder. The fog was thick that day, curling in long, wet tendrils across the cemetery. It was the kind of mist that made everything look like a dream, or a nightmare, where the shapes of the old graves stretched and bent, growing twisted like fingers reaching from the ground. I had been working in silence all morning, the same routine of clearing the paths and checking for anything out of place. But today something had changed. The whispers were sharper now, more distinct, like a voice you hear in the back of your mind but can never quite make out. They weren't coming from the wind anymore. They were coming from the earth. I moved quickly, trying to focus on the task at hand, but the unease in my chest grew heavier with every step. Then I remembered the box, the toolkit that had once belonged to the man before me, the last keeper of Ashridge Hollow. His name was Samuel Gray, but he hadn't left much behind. A few records, some scribbled notes, a couple of old burial shovels that had long since rusted through. And then there was this box, tucked under a forgotten tarp in the corner of the shed. I had found it a week ago, hidden beneath piles of old newspapers, and something about it had called to me. It was strange, small, and made of a dark, weathered wood that felt oddly cold against my fingers. The carvings on the side were intricate, like something out of an old story. Snakes coiling around a tree, twisted faces that didn't quite look human. I hadn't dared open it until now. Sitting on a bench beneath the crooked eaves of the shed, I slowly pried open the old box. The smell of mildew and rotting would hit me at once, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was familiar, like the scent of an old house you haven't been to in years. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, were a few items I recognized from the cemetery, tools that looked older than the gravestones themselves. There was a rusted iron bell, something I'd only ever seen in old photographs of funeral rites. A bundle of dried herbs tied with fraying twine. And then, the most disturbing thing of all, a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. The edges were frayed, as if it had been handled by countless hands over the years. I flipped it open carefully, the pages cracking like brittle paper as I scanned the faded ink. It was written in a hand that seemed to tremble with each stroke. The first entry was dated back in 1811, just after the cemetery had been established. The keeper before Samuel had written his warnings that were as chilling as they were cryptic. "They are coming," the first note read. "The earth speaks and the hollow stirs. The binding grows weak, and I feel them pushing up from the depths. They have no name, but they remember ours. Never listen, never speak, for their hunger is endless." My fingers trembled as I turned to the next page, a drawing of a symbol I'd seen before. It was carved into the oldest graves, the ones closest to the woods. A circle with jagged lines radiating outward, like the sun's rays, but twisted and bent in unnatural ways. I had always thought it was just the mark of some long-forgotten family, but now I wasn't so sure. "Do not dig. Do not disturb the soil beneath. Their whispering will lure you, and once you hear it, there is no turning back." I can hear them now, from under the graves, from the bones of the land itself. Samuel Gray will take my place when I am gone. He will hear the whispers, too. I shut the journal with a snap, the weight of its words sinking deep into my chest. Samuel Gray, the man who had been here before me, the one who had left behind this warning. And now here I was, hearing the whispers myself, feeling the pressure of the earth beneath me grow colder and darker. The gravekeeper before me had failed to heed the warning. The hollow had swallowed him whole, leaving nothing behind but these few crumpled notes. I could almost hear his voice, whispering through the wind, "You've come too late." I stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and looked around the shed. The fog outside seemed to have thickened, pressing in against the windows like a living thing. The whispers were louder now, the earth itself pulsing beneath my feet. Something was awake, something old, and it was calling for me. But it wasn't just the whispers anymore. I could feel the pressure in the air, like the very earth was holding its breath. And then, as I stood frozen, a voice broke through the others, sharp and clear. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the earth. It was my wife's voice. "Davis, it's time." I backed away from the box, my hands shaking, my chest tightening. The voice wasn't a memory. It was too real, too familiar. I could almost see her standing there, bathed in the pale light from the window. But no, she was dead. She had been dead for years. Yet here she was, whispering from beneath the soil. My mind raced, but I already knew what I had to do. The warning was clear. The ground had been disturbed. The whispers had begun. The hollow was stirring, and if I didn't act soon, there would be nothing left to stop what had been buried for so long. I glanced one last time at the box, the bell, the herbs, the journal. There was no more time. The earth was calling, and this time it wouldn't be ignored. The ground trembled beneath me. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the wind, that unsettling gust that whipped around Ashridge Hollow like it was trying to tear the place apart. But then I heard it. No, I felt it. A low rumble like something waking deep below the earth. It was the kind of noise you hear in your chest more than in your ears, vibrating the bones, shaking your ribs, making the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I gripped the shovel tighter, the handle slick with cold sweat. It was late, too late for anyone sane to be wandering these grounds, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That something was happening. The fog had rolled in thick and heavy, smothering the cemetery in a heavy, suffocating blanket. Even the moon, which usually fought to break through the mist, seemed scared tonight. It sat behind a curtain of cloud, pale and distant, like it didn't want to look at what was happening down here. I turned to the section of the cemetery where the graves always felt wrong. The older ones, the ones that had been there long before I took over this job. The ones no one ever spoke of, not even the oldest of the townsfolk. People told stories of that part of the cemetery, stories of things that shouldn't be buried, things that weren't quite dead. I thought it was all just that, stories, old wives' tales. But tonight, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched. A sharp crack echoed through the graveyard. I jumped, my heart in my throat. The earth shifted again, deeper this time. A grave at the far end of the row, an old one from the 1700s, heaved upward, the stone cracking as if it were a dry twig snapping underfoot. I stared, unable to move. My breath caught, my mind racing to understand what I was seeing. The stone didn't fall back into place. It stayed there, tilted at an impossible angle, as though something inside had forced it upward. I took a step forward, then another, instinctively drawn toward it. The whispers were louder now, as if the earth itself was breathing, its voice rising from the soil. The wind picked up, swirling around me like it had a mind of its own. It howled through the tombstones, a mournful, guttural sound that didn't belong in nature. It was more than the wind. It was something else, something old, something that had been buried here for far too long. I approached the grave, my hands shaking as I knelt beside the cracked stone. The air was thick, heavier than usual, like it was pressing down on me. I placed my palm on the stone and felt the heat. The grave was warm, almost unnaturally so, and that's when the whispers turned into voices. Soft at first, like a lullaby, then louder, clearer. "Let us out!" I yanked my hand back, my pulse racing. The words hung in the air, too clear to ignore. My head spun, dizziness creeping up from the base of my skull. I staggered to my feet, my thoughts a blur. No, this couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But as the whispers continued, growing more insistent, more pleading, I realized something terrible. The ground was alive. The cemetery was alive. I looked around, desperate for some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. The fog had thickened, a swirling mass of white that seemed to close in on me, blocking out everything. The trees, the chapel, the rest of the graveyard, everything was lost in the mist. It was just me and the grave now, and the whispers. I had to move. I had to get out. But something held me there, a force pulling me down into the earth, into the dark and the wet, into the cold that was slowly seeping into my bones. I took a step back, my legs shaking beneath me. I could feel the weight of whatever was buried here, pressing down, urging me to listen, to understand. And then I heard it, Carl's voice. I hadn't noticed him at first, but now he was standing at the edge of the fog, watching me. His eyes were wide, gleaming with a feverish light, and his lips curled into a grin that made my stomach churn. "It's begun," he said softly, his voice carrying over the wind like a death sentence. "It's too late to stop it now." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there in the fog, my hands trembling as I looked at him. But I couldn't. The whispers, no, the voices, were all around me now, inside my head, inside my heart, clawing at the edges of my sanity. "You've felt it, haven't you? The hunger," Carl continued, stepping forward. His voice was too calm, too knowing. "The earth is waking, and it wants what it was promised." I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't want to understand. I tried to take a step back, but the ground beneath my feet shifted again, as though the earth itself were trying to swallow me whole. The stone from the grave snapped back into place, but the ground beneath it cracked open wider, revealing a pit of blackness. The whispers turned into screams. And that's when I realized the truth. The thing buried beneath Ashridge Hollow wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a restless spirit. It was something older, something darker, something that had been waiting for centuries. And now it was awake. I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet as I made my way deeper into the crypt. The whispers had stopped for a moment, replaced by an unsettling stillness that seemed to stretch and thicken the air. The only sound was my own breath, ragged and loud in the silence. But the silence wasn't truly empty. No, it was full, thick with the weight of something ancient. Something waiting. The stone walls of the crypt closed in around me, the dampness seeping through my boots, creeping up my legs. The air felt wrong, heavy with the smell of earth and old bones. It was as though the crypt itself was alive, breathing, waiting for me to reach the center. There, at the heart of the crypt, Carl stood. He didn't look like the man I knew. His eyes were wide and unblinking, pupils swallowed by blackness, his hands trembling as they traced symbols in the air, carving invisible lines into the space around him. The faintest traces of blood stained his lips, a smudge on his gaunt cheek. He muttered under his breath, his voice low and rhythmic, almost musical, like a chant from another time, another world. And beneath him, the ground, something moved. It wasn't like the earth shifting underfoot, more like it was being pulled, coaxed, by something far older than any of us. The crypt itself seemed to groan, a low, deep noise that vibrated in my chest. "Davis," Carl's voice broke through the thrum of tension. It was softer now, but no less chilling. His voice was like a thread winding its way through my mind, pulling me closer to him, to whatever was buried beneath. I took a step forward, though my legs felt like lead. The whispers started again, faint at first, like the breath of someone speaking from a distance. But they were closer now, circling me inside my head. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, whether they were from Carl, from the earth, or from something far worse. "They're here, Davis," Carl continued, his voice both soothing and maddening. "They've been waiting. We're so close. Can't you feel them? They're waiting for you too. For us. Together, we can bring them back. All of it. Power, knowledge, freedom. His eyes flicked to me, wide and gleaming in the dark. Don't you want to know what they know? Don't you want to hear what they've learned? I swallowed, my throat dry, my heart pounding. There was no denying it, something was here. Something beneath us, beneath this crypt, beneath the very soil of Ashridge Hollow. I could feel it in my bones, in the air. It was calling to me, tempting me with promises I couldn't ignore. But then, amidst the sound of Carl's chanting, the whispers changed. They weren't distant anymore. They weren't benevolent. They were insistent, almost frantic, rising from the cracks in the crypt's walls and the floor beneath me. They spoke with urgency, with an edge of hunger that made my blood run cold. Davis, you have to listen. They are here. You are here. The voice spoke through my own thoughts, the words not just heard but felt, vibrating through me, rattling my mind. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. They knew me. They knew me. They will have you, if you don't speak the words. We will have you. Your wife, your soul. Everything you fear is real. You can stop us, but you can never truly leave. The crypt seemed to shake around me. My pulse thudded in my ears, louder than ever. The whispers became clearer, stronger, more focused. It wasn't just the dead that had been waiting. It was something much older, something far more dangerous. Carl's voice was distant now, a blur in the noise. Davis, you have to say it. You have to say the word. Say it with me. I'll be with you. I'll show you what lies beneath. We'll be gods, Davis, gods. I could hear him, but it was like I wasn't truly listening. His voice felt distant, washed out by the overwhelming presence in the air. I had to stop this. I had to. The walls of the crypt were closing in, and the whispers were starting to drown out everything else. Carl wasn't just wrong, he was lost. Completely, utterly lost. He had already given himself to whatever lay beneath. And now, it was trying to claim me. I took a step back, and the ground groaned beneath me. The crypt seemed to shift with my movement, as if it, too, was waking. The walls closed in, and the shadows stretched, flickering unnaturally in the dark. Carl was still chanting, oblivious to the fact that I was no longer with him. I had to get out, but there was nowhere to run. The crypt was a labyrinth of corridors that twisted back on themselves, paths that led nowhere. And all the while, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. You can't escape. I glanced down at my feet, and for a moment, the earth beneath me seemed to rise, curling like fingers reaching for my legs. Then I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the rusted ceremonial bell from the crypt's stone altar, a tool meant to bind, not release. The whispers screamed in fury as I rang it, the sharp, shrill sound cutting through the chaos. And oh, the entity howled in my mind. But it was too late. The bell's resonance echoed off the stone, reverberating in the very core of the crypt. The walls buckled. The earth trembled beneath us. The crypt shook violently as if the thing below was fighting to be set free. But the bell, my bell, held it at bay. Carl's eyes widened in terror as the ground beneath him cracked open. The shadows that had been curling around me consumed him. I could only hear his strangled scream before the crypt fell silent. I wasn't sure if it was truly over. But one thing was clear, the whispers stopped, and the ground was still. The crypt was colder than I remembered, colder than the air outside. The stone walls were slick with moss, and the smell of wet earth filled my nose, thick and sour. But it wasn't just the smell or the dampness that made my skin crawl. It was the silence, the deep, oppressive silence that stretched like a blanket over everything. No birds, no rustling of leaves, no sound of distant footsteps. Just stillness, as if the whole world had held its breath. Carl stood in the center of the chamber, his arms raised high, chanting in a language that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. His voice wasn't normal. It wasn't human anymore. It was distorted, like something that had been buried for centuries, trying to claw its way back to life. I wanted to run. My legs felt weak, as if the earth itself was pulling me down into the darkness. But I couldn't. Not now. The weight of everything that had led me here was too heavy to ignore. The whispers, the signs, the madness that had infected Carl, they all pointed to this moment. And I wasn't going to let it slip away. Stop, I managed to say, my voice rasping, thick with fear. But Carl didn't hear me. Or maybe he didn't care. He was lost in the ritual now, lost to something ancient, something that had taken over his mind long before I ever stepped foot in this cursed place. The air seemed to thicken, and the stone beneath my feet groaned. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the settling of the earth. It was something else. Something alive. Something that had been waiting in the dark for centuries. And it was waking up. Carl's eyes were wide, unblinking, as he stared into the shadows that seemed to gather around him, a swirling mass of dark energy. I didn't know what he had done, what he had unleashed, but it was here now, and it was real. "David," Carl said, his voice soft now, but with a terrible finality to it. "You don't have to fight it. You don't have to fight them." He turned to me, his eyes no longer his own. They were hollow, empty, as if his soul had already been claimed. "They've promised you everything, David. Everything you've lost. Your wife, your peace, all of it can be yours. Just say the word." His hands dropped slowly, like he was waiting for me to take the final step, to say what he so desperately wanted to hear. I could feel it, too, the pull, the lure, the promise. I could hear her voice, faint but clear, drifting from the depths of the darkness that surrounded us. "David, come to me." I took a step forward, then another. My chest tightened with the weight of it, the choice that had been laid out before me. Was this what I wanted? Was I really going to walk this path, to open that door? But I remembered the smell of fresh earth, the sound of the wind in the trees, the coldness of the stones under my fingers when I touched my wife's grave. I remembered the way she'd looked, the way she'd felt when I held her, the life that had been stolen from me. And I realized something then. Something deep, something buried in the pit of my stomach. If I opened that door, if I gave in, I wasn't just giving up my soul. I was giving up everything she ever was, everything she ever stood for. I took another step forward, but this time it wasn't toward Carl. It was toward the altar, toward the stone that had been left untouched for centuries. "David," Carl's voice cracked. "Don't make this mistake. They will show you the truth. You'll see the world as it really is. They will give you everything." The shadows pressed in around me, thickening, swirling like a living thing. I could feel the weight of them on my chest, on my soul. I wanted to fall to my knees. I wanted to give in. But I couldn't. Not now. Not ever. I reached into my coat and pulled out the iron bell, the one I had found in the old gravekeeper's kit, the one that had been used to seal this place. My fingers wrapped around it, cold and unyielding. The bell felt heavier now than it ever had before. I could feel the ancient power coursing through it, a force that seemed to push against me, testing my will. Carl's expression twisted in rage, but it was too late. The shadows around him began to scream, a terrible, guttural sound that made the walls tremble. He reached out, his hands clawing at the air, as if trying to pull me into the void with him. But I didn't hesitate. I slammed the bell onto the ground with everything I had. The sound it made was unlike anything I had ever heard, a sharp, reverberating clang that shook the earth beneath my feet. The ground cracked, the shadows recoiling from the noise as if they were being torn away. The darkness seemed to fight back, but the bell rang again, and the earth beneath us began to tremble in a way that felt like the very foundation of the world was breaking apart. Carl screamed, his voice tearing through the air, but it was drowned out by the sound of the earth cracking open. The shadows twisted and thrashed, but they couldn't hold on. The ground opened, wide and deep, swallowing everything. Carl's body was the first to fall, his scream echoing in the chasm that had opened beneath him. The last thing I saw was his hand reaching out, fingers stretched, grasping at the air, before he was gone. I stood there, frozen, the weight of what I had done settling like a stone in my chest. The whispers stopped. The darkness receded. The ground beneath me stilled. I didn't know if the entity was truly gone, or if it was just waiting, lurking beneath the surface. But I knew one thing for certain. I had made my choice. And whatever came next, I would face it alone. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, but when I finally turned to leave, the crypt was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like the calm before a storm. But I had stopped it. For now. And that would have to be enough. I could feel it then, the weight of the earth pressing down, the pulse of it beneath my boots, a rhythm that wasn't natural, something that had no right to be here. The whispers had become a roar, an endless chant scraping against the edges of my mind, dragging me down. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The ground itself seemed to hold me in place, like it was saying, "You belong to me now." Carl stood ahead of me, his eyes wide, his lips moving in a language I couldn't understand. It was beautiful, melodic, like something ancient and forgotten. The shadows around him were thickening, writhing, twisting into shapes that weren't human. There was something else. Something old. Behind us, the crypt's stone doors had cracked open, and I could see the darkness that waited beyond them. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, like they were hungry, stretching out their fingers to beckon us closer. I could almost hear the thing inside, urging me to step forward. Carl's voice was a whisper now, just a thin thread of sound, but it carried power, power that gripped me, pulling me into his madness. "It's almost over, Davis. Just one more word. Say it, and we can both be free. We can understand it all." I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was pale, drawn, eyes sunken into his skull. The madness had eaten him from the inside out. But the thing behind him, the thing I had tried so desperately to avoid, was growing, shifting in the shadows. I could feel it pulling at my chest, tearing at the edges of my soul. "No," I muttered, my voice barely escaping my throat. "I won't." But Carl was already laughing, a high-pitched sound that didn't belong to him. He didn't hear me anymore. He was too far gone, lost to whatever darkness had taken root in the earth beneath this cemetery. The whispers were growing louder now, scraping at my skin like claws, like something long buried was finally waking up. The ground trembled beneath me, a low, guttural hum. It wasn't just the crypt shaking anymore. It was everything. The very earth was alive. I could feel its hunger, its desperation, and I knew then that this wasn't about us. It wasn't about Carl and me. It was about them, the ones that had come before. I could see it now, just beyond the veil of shadows, something massive, something ancient, stirring beneath the dirt. Its shape wasn't clear, it was too vast, too wrong. But I could feel it, a presence that filled the air, made my skin crawl. It was more than just a thing. It was hunger, and it wanted to be free. "Carl, stop," I said again, this time louder, but my words were lost in the chaos of whispers around us. The thing in the crypt, the hollow, was reaching, its tendrils stretching through the cracks in the stone, through the cracks in my mind. It was calling to Carl. It was calling to me. But I had to fight. I had to remember who I was. I wasn't just the keeper of this graveyard. I was the one who could stop this. I was the one who had the power to end it. I reached into the satchel at my side, my hands trembling, and pulled out the iron tools, the relics that had been handed down through the years. They were cold, heavy with the weight of centuries, and they burned in my grip. I felt a rush of heat run through my veins as I held them. The old gravekeeper's tools meant to bind, meant to stop whatever had been let loose here. Carl turned to face me, his eyes wide with madness, his mouth a gaping hole of frantic words, but I didn't hear them. All I heard was the thing beneath the earth, and the final ritual. I stood tall, despite the terror clawing at my insides. I stepped forward, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, and I recited the words, the counter-ritual I had found in the old journals. The words tasted foreign on my tongue, ancient, forbidden. But they were mine now. And then the ground screamed. The earth howled as the crypt doors slammed shut, a deafening noise like the roar of an animal in agony. The shadows recoiled, shrinking back from the force of the ritual, but the air thickened with a choking weight. Carl's body jerked violently, his mouth still moving, but no sound came from him now. His eyes rolled back, the last breath escaping his lungs in a sharp exhale as the entity's grasp consumed him. I pushed on, forcing the words out, my voice raw and desperate. The earth beneath me groaned, the very soil cracking open like a wound. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were screams, screams of rage, of hunger, of something ancient that didn't want to be bound again. But I kept going. The air shifted. The ground stilled. And then silence. I collapsed to my knees, the tools falling from my hands as the crypt sealed itself once more. The fog that had been swirling around us dissipated, leaving the graveyard eerily still. The world felt dead. I didn't know how long I stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, my heart racing in my chest. All I could hear was the sound of my breath, the stillness that had descended on the hollow. It was over. But I knew deep down that it wasn't truly gone. Not really. The thing beneath the earth was still there, just waiting for the next fool to come along. Carl was gone, consumed by the very thing he had sought to release. His body lay on the ground, pale and lifeless, a puppet now, tangled in the web of the old powers that had been bound here long ago. I stood slowly, the weight of what I had done settling over me. The ground was still, the whispers gone, but I could feel their echo deep inside me. I looked out at the cemetery, my cemetery, and I knew it was never truly safe. The hollow had been sealed for now. But I wasn't foolish enough to think it wouldn't stir again. I'd be here, waiting, to guard it, to keep it buried, forever. It's quiet now, too quiet. I keep the cemetery in a way that most would find odd. Not too clean, not too well kept, but not left to rot either. I've learned that the earth has its own way of healing, its own rhythm. There's no point in disturbing it too much. The dead prefer their secrets kept, and I don't meddle with them more than I need to. There's a grave near the chapel, the one with the cracked stone, where I still feel it. It's subtle, like the ground is breathing underneath, but I've learned to sense it. That's the part that always stays with me, the feeling of something being just beneath the surface. Something that remembers, something that watches. People don't come around anymore. Not that they ever really did. A few folks still wander through now and then, but they're quiet, hesitant. They know. I can tell by the way they look at the gate, the way their steps slow as they pass the old chapel. It's not the graveyard they fear, it's what lies beneath it. The fog is thicker now, but it's not natural, not like it used to be. It moves, swirling and twisting as if it has a mind of its own. I don't bother trying to chase it off anymore. There's no point. If it's come back, then it's just part of the land now. Something settled in, like an old acquaintance who's overstayed their welcome, but you don't quite have the courage to ask them to leave. I remember that night, the way the earth felt when the whispers stopped. The silence was louder than any scream, louder than the ritual chants Carl had whispered with such fervor. I thought I'd be free of it, that when the crypt sealed, when Carl's voice was cut off in that final, terrible scream, the world would go back to the way it was before. But silence is never truly peaceful, not when it's built on something buried deep. Something that waits. I don't know if the seal is still holding. I've thought about it every day since. That's the trouble with something like this. The more you learn, the more you realize how little you really understand. Carl believed he could control it, harness it, wake it. But he was just a man, same as me, just with more reckless curiosity and a desperation I never had. I never wanted power. Never wanted knowledge beyond what I already had. But sometimes, when the wind shifts and the fog rolls in, I hear it again. The faintest of whispers, rising from the earth. It doesn't call my name, not anymore. But it's there. I can feel it, pressing against my ribs like the earth itself wants to claw its way out. It's always been there. Since the first time I felt the ground tremble beneath me. Since the first time I heard it call me by name. And it will be there long after I'm gone. Maybe it will be Carl's voice I hear next time. Maybe it will be something worse. I've lived my life, keeping the dead in their place. But the truth is, the ground doesn't always stay buried. Some things just can't be sealed forever. And when they wake up, when they finally stretch their limbs after so many years, well, I hope I'm ready. But a part of me wonders if anyone can ever really be ready. The wind shifts again. The earth moves just slightly underfoot. I pause, listen. And for the briefest of moments, I think I hear something faint and familiar. Not a whisper this time. Not a voice. But a breath. And it's close. Too close. I turn and walk back to the chapel. It's just a little farther now, to the next grave, to the next place that's waiting. Something stirring beneath the earth. And it's only a matter of time before it speaks again.